What do we need to rebuild in the Pacific to show the flag in an appropriate manner?
Well, two things. One, I'm glad he's doing this now because I think there was a feeling in the Pacific, in some countries at least, that we were so preoccupied with Ukraine and Europe that we had more or less forgotten about the Pacific. This trip will demonstrate that we have not forgotten and that we realize that it's important. Second, he's got to get this set of alliances organized. There's been a lot of talk about cooperation, coordination, but there really hasn't been much progress on trade. The cooperation between the United States, Japan, Australia, New Zealand are all of these are important, and he has got to demonstrate that this is a sustainable alliance.
Right.
Pulling out of TPP was one of the worst possible things we could have done because it showed not only a trade set of actions that was pulling back,
right,
but it showed that we really were not committed to a sustained relationship.
Ambassador, I want to get through this quickly because Lisa's got some really important questions away from this. This is your wheelhouse. All Republicans and Democrats are against TPP. My guess is they're against Indo-Pacific. Let's go granular to the reported victory of Marcos Jr. in the Philippines and what we do at Subic Bay and at Clark. How do we shift our modern behavior back to what you and I knew in our youth?
This is a critically important point. The way to look at Asia is there are two island chains. One is the one that's very close to China. The Chinese really have increased their domination over that with their small islands and their new Air Force bases that they've put in. We have to demonstrate that we have credibility in that so-called second island chain, which is the Philippines, which is the Marianas, Guam, and Australia, New Zealand. We have to show that we are a strong presence there. And working with the Philippines, which is critically important, it was in World War II, it is now, and that's going to be, I think, extremely important to demonstrate that we can work with young Marcos and develop our base structure, which was, as you know, virtually eliminated.
Bob, how optimistic are you that the political noise will be able to dovetail the national security issues of shifting around some trade partnerships at a time when inflation is very much at the forefront and people are more concerned about how quickly prices are rising as a result, in part at least, for some of the supply chain disruptions and realignments?
A very good point. I mean, the president's in a difficult spot. On one hand, it is clear that a lot of the tariffs that we've imposed on China do contribute. They're not the main contributing factor, but they do contribute to higher prices in the United States. And yet, if the president were to appear to be weak on that, it would look like he was weak on China. The priority here, it seems to me, is to deal with the inflationary issues. We can demonstrate that we're still resolute on China by strengthening our alliances in the region, which gives the president more flexibility to lower some of the tariffs on China, which really have not had any impact on China anyway, but certainly have had an impact on prices in certain sectors in the United States. So if he's tough enough and firm enough in building our alliances, it gives him a little more wiggle room to take action to reduce tariffs on certain Chinese items. And he needs to develop these trade relationships that we threw away when we got out of TPP. He's got to resurrect those and make sure that we don't just talk about them, that we have a firm and sustained program of trade cooperation with these countries in the Indo-Pacific.
Bob, just real quick here, we just have a little bit of time left. What grade would you give this administration in terms of reaffirming some of these alliances?
I give them very high marks. I think the fact the president now, in the middle of what's going on in Europe, is making a major trip to Asia is going to be very important. There's going to be a G20 meeting coming up. Whether he goes is not clear, but I think that anything he can do to demonstrate with these friends and allies in the region that we're back and credible is important. The one thing he also has to do is make sure that he can get bipartisan support for sustaining this, because a lot of these countries say, well, Biden's going out there doing this, making this good trip. But if the House flips and if you get another administration a couple of years from now, that could pull back from our commitment to alliances in the region. So we have to show, A, not only that we're doing this and we're firm in doing it, but B, this is a sustainable proposition.
Robert Hormats.
And C, we've got to figure out how to deal with the Chinese issues that really matters. These tariffs really have no real impact on China. There has to be other stuff, which is particularly intellectual property, trade secrets,